Welcome back to the Free Mouse MC YouTube channel, and you can already see behind me a bunch of motorcycles because we are at the Kawasaki Z650s press launch, and it's the motorcycle that I'm going to be riding and reviewing today. And I'm curious about this one because it has the 650 engine from Kawasaki, which has been in quite a lot of bikes and has been produced for quite a long time. An engine that has proven to be very reliable, and now seeing it in another new motorcycle that is quite budget friendly, I think can be interesting with such a proven platform. It's basically the improvement of the Kawasaki Z650. In some markets, the Z650s is going to replace the Z650, like for example in my domestic market. However, in some markets they are going to coexist, and it's interesting to have a look at the platform. So let's see how it rides and also how it looks, as there are some visual upgrades to the machine. Here we see the bikes being prepared while the motorcycle journalists get ready. One question that I have in my mind about this bike is the 20-year-old engine in this bike still adequate for a modern motorcycle? One thing that I instantly noticed positively is that there's an electricity outlet, basically saving the shoot today because I didn't manage to charge my phone. So how does the Kawasaki Z650s ride when you put it quicker through the paces? The bike is definitely noticeably thinner than the Kawasaki Z900 and demands less room. You have a bit of a sportier riding experience than on the normal Z650, which is completely down to the more forward-leaned body position. With 68 horsepower at 8,000 RPM and 64 Nm of torque at 6,700 RPM, the Kawasaki Z650s has less power than the competing motorcycles. However, it feels quite torquey down low and still quite quick in real-life applications, especially with the optional quick shifter. You arrive at 140 in the blink of an eye. The engine has a 180-degree crank, but quite an aggressive mapping, so it's definitely a fun engine. However, it sometimes can feel like a bit from 10 years ago.
Step into the light, don't distract and repeat. Come on, get on up, get them up, and feel free. Oh, get up on your feet, feel the street, feel the beat, yeah.
So we just made a little coffee stop over here with this beautiful view behind me and the motorcycle, and I've now been riding the Kawasaki Z650s for about 3 hours, and one thing that comes apparent to me is the bike is supposed to be a beginner bike. However, these things are still quick, and the bike is perfectly fast enough with its 68 horsepower and 64 Newton meters of torque. And one thing that really came to mind when we were riding the bike through the city, a bit through the slower bits earlier, was the bike feels very similar to a bike with less power if you drive slow. However, it still has enough power to really be fun on the cross-country road, and to the degree that you can, I would say, use about 80% of it on the road in most situations. So this, I think, is perfectly enough. And then with the really reliable engine that we've been seeing from Kawasaki now for over 10 years, the 650 engine, I think this can be a motorcycle that people don't buy as a stepping stone, but that people get and just keep, or buy on the used market and keep for a really, really long time. And plenty of them were sold, so I think we could be looking at something like, there are these old motorcycles that just keep on, and that end up plentiful on the used market in 20 years. And I think we could be potentially looking at one of those with the Kawasaki Z650 and the Z650s. So how is it to sit on this motorcycle? The seat height is 805 millimeters. For context, I'm 1 meter 95, and it's quite comfortable. The bike is more lean forward than its previous version. However, the bike is pretty narrow. I earlier needed to go through a few cars, and that worked quite well without a headache. The knee angle is also comfortable. However, that starts hurting after a bit of a while at my height. I think all in all, it's a great mix between comfortable and sporty, and for like daily riding and wanting to ride this bike a lot and also use it as a commuter potentially. I think this can be pretty good. So I just took the Kawasaki Z650s also through quite a rapid pace, and I think it's a good time to have a look at what the bike looks like and what the bike comes with, especially with this beautiful surrounding, being able to see the sea. So let's go. Yeah, this is the bike. First things first, it has this nice black color that's matte with a little bit of a pearl effect. I really like that because it's difficult to keep a black motorcycle looking clean and good. That's often a big struggle, and I think with that color it's going to be easy. I like the frame here. Compared to the previous model, it has this like extra fairing part here, which is quite good for like leg wind protection. But basically what it is, it's like the shoulder pads from the 80s. It's supposed to make the motorcycle look bigger than it is, to give you a nicer feel when looking at your own motorcycle. Because if you now imagine all this stuff to be gone, the perspective from the cockpit starts being quite small at the end. This works quite well. Also, like while we were having the photo session and I saw the other journalists like riding past me, you could mistake the motorcycle for the Z900, which is kind of the idea, because you know, you want to make people that like get this motorcycle feel comfortable with their bike and not being like, oh, I got the small one. When having a look at the other components of the motorcycle, we here have the front forks. The front forks have a traditional setup, no upside down, and they're not adjustable. However, you have this little protector here protecting the forks from stones flying up. That can be quite useful. And we have Nissan brake components with a double front disc with 300 millimeters in the front. How does that end up to drive with this front suspension setup? I would say pretty good. One of my colleagues is trying that out over there. We're currently at the free trial where like we just get to ride around the countryside. And it works quite well. I have good trust in the front suspension. I'm on the heavier side, and the target audience for this motorcycle usually adjusts their suspension either never or once. Ooh, and we have a rally car. Well, somewhat of Ford Ka Rally. I'm really happy that it comes with dual front brake discs of 300 millimeters, because if you look at a budget motorcycle and what kind of components it should have, having a really good brake is really, really nice, and that's something that you really feel really often when riding. In the rear you have 130 millimeters of suspension travel with a pre-load adjustable shock. That one did a great job today, also when like switching from side to side. It didn't do any funny business like basically dampening in when you would do that, so all good in that regard. The Kawasaki Z650s is going to cost 7,545 euros. So what is now my verdict on the Kawasaki Z650s? I have a bit of a controversial verdict, most likely, because a lot of people see this bike just as a stepping stone. When I started riding, a lot of people that I rode with had the Kawasaki Z900, but like the A2 version that you could restrict down, that openly then only had 95. That is, I think, mostly for the ego of being able to say, oh yeah, I have the big motorcycle, I have the Kawasaki Z900. I think the Z650 is perfectly adequate in the performance it can give. I'm here on these like curvy Spanish roads, and basically a bigger bike couldn't even stretch its legs here, and I have two motorcycles privately. I have a 50 horsepower bike and like a 150 horsepower motorcycle, and this is pretty much in the middle. However, when I rode earlier through the city, this was still like riding my 50 horsepower motorcycle, which is what you want in the city. However, then when getting out and like being here on this road, you had definitely enough performance to get around, and I think this is a great motorcycle as an only motorcycle to keep for many years. I'm also bringing that up because I'm not the biggest fan of the Z650 engine from a riding perspective actually, because it has the 180-degree crank and that can feel a bit 2014-ish. Also, especially when it comes to the other bikes that I rode with this engine. Here in this bike, the engine feels quite peppy and the sound is nice. However, you can feel that it's that kind of engine, but basically the 270-degree crank, which is kind of standard in this class of motorcycle at this point, every bike has it. And then also this bike is really reliable. Then also this engine platform has the reputation to be really reliable, and it has been on the market for so many years. And with that, on the used market, these things are going to be so plentiful, they're going to be so many parts, and the majority of bikes that turn out to be quite well 20-30 years down the line are the ones that are a tad bit boring. However, no motorcycle is ever actually boring, and this is like nitpicking on a really high level. I think the bike is worth keeping around, as in don't see this as a stepping stone, see it as a motorcycle that you have for at least 5 years, I would say, because it definitely has enough power for that. It's fun enough, and for the daily riding and just getting around town, it still has the benefits of a small motorcycle while being not a small motorcycle. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely like and subscribe, and see you guys in the next video.